Hey everybody, it's Dr. Eric Balcavager back for another edition of the Thyroid Answers Podcast. And today's a little different. We're not going to be doing as much thyroid-y science stuff, but we're going to be talking really about one of the foundational principles I talk about in the book, which is dietary fitness. And it's one of the biggest challenges for a lot of people who have chronic health issues is they don't have great dietary fitness. So today I'm pleased to welcome James Berry to the podcast. He's a chef. He's been in the business for almost 2 decades, cooking for people. And one of his things that he was doing was finding people who were seeing practitioners who had these, getting recommendations for how to change their diet, how to modify it. And these people, superstars, and I'll let him explain that in a bit, who were like, okay, that sounds great, but how the heck am I supposed to do it? And so he was the guy who would help formulate the AIP diet or a carnivore diet for the individual clients so they could get better nutrition. And he's one of the reasons we brought him on is he's got a blend of seasonings that contain organ meat, which I think is awesome because I've said this multiple times on the podcast that the organs are probably the most nutritional part of the meat. We just don't eat enough of it. And he's bringing the organs back to the diet and in an easy way to consume them with their seasonings. And they've sent me some of this, and it is unbelievably good. And I'm a fan now. So James, welcome to the Thyroid Answers Podcast. How are you today?
Excellent. Thanks so much for having me, Dr. Eric.
So and you call me Eric. Fine. Don't worry about the doctor
but you got to call me chef. No, I'm kidding.
Oh, all right. Okay. You got it.
I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding.
I've seen it. Yes, chef. No, chef. Yes, chef. Right.
You watched The Bear, right? You watched The Bear.
Right. Yep. Yeah. So here's what we want to get started with. You've got a nice bio, but I prefer that you give us your background. Give us like the short or the version of your history of how you got into the world of food and cooking and being a chef, and then we'll talk about why this product came about.
Yeah, to this day, my mom is just completely baffled that I became a chef because I grew up in a household where you knew dinner was ready because the smoke detector went off.
Yeah.
So we were not foodies growing up. I wasn't raised eating organ meats. You mentioned you're a hunter. I did not get raised hunting. We had frozen vegetables, meat, and potatoes on our plates. It's funny, even though I grew up in the 70s, I say I grew up eating 50s food because I think a lot of times we get the foods that our parents grew up eating. That's how I think a lot of generations pass down their illnesses or psychological or physicals because they're just teaching you what they learned, right? And so we were not a foodie household, but yet I fell into cooking. I just loved it. Did not see it as a career though, not until I was in my 30s. And it was actually 9/11. When 9/11 happened, I did a complete audit of my life. And I really only wanted to focus on the things that had a heart that I truly believed I was here to do. And I kind of reminded myself that cooking was something I've loved, my whole life, and decided to go to culinary school for it. I went to a school in New York that specialized in really healthy cooking. We looked at all these different diet types. I learned about organ meats then through the Weston A. Price Foundation. We studied Weston A. Price's book, which is a fantastic book, but very hard. Like everyone's got it on their shelves, but no one actually reads it because it's very hard to go read and follow, just because it's so dense. But it's a fantastic book about kind of nourishing foods, traditional foods, and how to prepare them. So learned about it then, but did not incorporate it. And yet, when I got out of school, I was cooking for some big names like Tom Cruise, Gerard Butler, George Clooney, Barbra Streisand briefly, John Cusack. And yet I didn't cook organ meats for these people. I did a lot of really healthy things for them, but I didn't do organ meats. And I think it's mostly because I wasn't doing them. And it really wasn't until I had kids that I started to get really serious about, okay, what are the most nutrient dense foods on the planet? Like, what are the ones that you're just going to get the most bang for your buck? And it's organ meats, hands down. Mm-hmm. And so then it was all about, well, how do I actually support not only my kids, but myself and clients and people in general with getting them, because really there's really three main hurdles. We either think they're disgusting, we don't know how to cook them, or we don't know how to source them.
Right.
And so that's ultimately, as a chef, I've always been someone who looks at things from kind of an outlier perspective or a skewed perspective. I'm not a celebrity hound chef, even though I cooked for celebrities. I'm not the type that would go on a cooking show or like a competition show, because for me, cooking has always been about how can I support someone's health? How can I help them get healthier? Not how can I stroke my ego or something like that. So it was really about that. And so fortunately, after I cooked for these celebrities, I then had my own meal delivery service in LA for about 8 years. And then I had to leave LA to just escape the kind of work mentality and environment I had kind of gotten myself in the muck in, because I had created a business that requires so much of my attention and so much of my physical exertion that I was basically not getting sleep. I wasn't exercising. I wasn't eating right. And I felt a decline in my health severely in those 8 years. And so I left. We moved from LA just so I could get out from under it. I sold that business, and I was a stay-at-home dad for about 4 years. And it was during that time that staying at home, being a father, one of the hardest jobs I've ever done, first of all. So kudos to anyone out there that's ever been a stay-at-home parent. It's an extremely difficult job. But it was during that time that I got my health back. I napped with our newest child at the time a lot. I was able to get more sleep. I started exercise again. I definitely got my diet back in alignment. And that's when I came up with the idea for Pluck. And I'd had ideas when I previously had my own, my other company. I had ideas for cultured condiments way before they were there. I had ideas for bone broth companies where it's the concentrated bone broth and you're just adding hot water way before anyone else did, but I couldn't execute them because I was swallowed by my business. And when I got the idea for Pluck and the idea of fusing organ meats with seasonings that no one else had done, I was like, I have to do that. I cannot sit on this, because it felt not only important, but unique. And I wanted to hit the market before anyone else thought of it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's great. And we'll get into it in more detail. It's interesting. I'm not sure how old you are. I think we're probably pretty similar in age, would be my guess. But when you're headed off when I was in college in the late 80s, right? And we had I don't think cooking was not a thing that most of the people were thinking of. And one of my buddies on my rugby team disappeared one day, right? And we didn't know what happened to him. And then it was like 3 or 4 months later, he shows back up, and we're like, dude, off the face of the earth. What happened to you? And he had headed off. Is there Johnson and Wales? Is that a cooking school in New England somewhere? Is that?
Possibly. I'm not familiar with that one because I'm mostly from the West Coast, but I think you're right. I think it is.
But he went off to cooking school. I'm like, dude, why didn't you tell us you went to cooking school? He's like, I didn't, I didn't want anybody giving me a hard time. Like, it's not cool.
Yeah.
But we were like, we'd make fun of you. Of course we'd make fun of you. That's what we do. But we didn't think much of it. And you're talking about how you became, because I want to ask you how you became like a celebrity chef, but it's funny. We just don't know how these things happen. When one day I get a phone call from one of my buddies on the rugby team, it's a decade later, and they're like, hey, you got to turn on the TV and turn on like ETV or something. Benzi's doing the Oscar dinner, and our friend Matt Benzavanga, who worked for Wolfgang Puck, was doing the Oscar dinner, and you can hear him yelling and screaming in the background because they're filming the kitchens, what's going on behind the Oscar dinner, all the cooking and stuff. And I'm like, here's Benzi, like this simple, just a regular guy who takes off for, sneaks out to go to cooking school and is now Wolfgang Puck's one of his main guys and running the Oscar dinner. Like, it was just like the funniest thing ever. But so he got connected with a whole bunch of celebrities through cooking. But how did you get connected through cooking?
Well, yeah, I'll answer that. But I gotta, yeah, you're so right about the culinary culture back in the day, because people forget, there were two chefs on, at least when I was a kid, I remember two chefs on, and they were both on PBS, and it was Julia Childs and The
Yeah,
Frugal Gourmet.
right.
Like that was it. There was no other culture, there was no TV culture with chefs. Wolfgang Puck was probably the first celebrity chef, really, but he was known, to your point, for catering events, and
Mhm.
and he didn't necessarily have his food brand then that you find in the market. So this is a more recent phenomena, and I was, it's fascinating. I don't know if you felt like this around becoming a functional doctor, but I was pursuing acting for a long time, basically for like 10 years. And in anyone that's ever been in that entertainment business, you got to put out 100% and you maybe get 15%. Like you put out way more than you get. It's a very challenging career to stay in for a long time. But I was a hard worker. I've always been a hard worker, but I worked hard. I was not one of those people that waited around for people to come to me. I was constantly doing stuff. Well, when I pursued cooking, it was almost like the stars aligned, because I still did my 100%, working hard, but I got back 200%. Like it went the other direction. So it kind of had this feeling of like, maybe I tapped into what it was meant to do, because it was so effortless compared to the things I'd previously done. So I got out of culinary school, and it was crazy, man. I mean, I literally would think it and it would just manifest. I got out of culinary school. My first job was working as an intern at a rehab center. It was in Malibu Canyons. And then I got out. I ended up getting my first client, which was a CBS reporter, a news anchor. And then I was like, I want to cook for a band. I just thought it. And suddenly I got a call 2 weeks later to be the vegan vegetarian chef on the Vans Warped Tour. I mean, just this random thing where we traveled. It was a 60-day tour. We traveled to 50 cities in 60 days. And we even hit Canada. And it was an amazingly challenging job, but I wanted that. I knew that I didn't want to work in a restaurant, and then I needed the discipline, because there's certain, cooking is not, it's not very cerebral. It's instinctual. And particularly if you're a baker, yes, you do have to have more kind of analytical thinking skills. But when you're a chef, it's very instinctual and it's very physical. And a lot of what you need to learn, you can't learn in a book and you can't learn in school. You have to do it. And so I knew that I was missing part of my education because I wasn't working like your friend in a catering service or in a restaurant. I knew that I was missing something. So the Vans Warped Tour is my kind of like super powered, like just dive into that world, because I was cooking for 200 people every day and in extreme conditions, and the rest of the team was cooking for something like 1,000 people. So in a day, we were cooking for between 1,200 and 1,400 people. So it was insane. And I really learned how to be faster and better and just kind of able to deal with stressful situations from that job. But from there, fortunately, the school I went to was very well known for, well, actually, I didn't know this going into it. The school ended up being a school where the people that managed celebrities would call the school looking for private chefs. I did not know that when I applied, but that's what I learned afterwards, is that the school, basically, my first 2 years out of the school, I got every job I wanted from the school. And yes, it was a great school, but it's also because I was in my 30s when I went. I was not right out of high school. I paid for it myself, and it was very expensive. And I didn't waste a minute, man. Like I showed up to every class. I got perfect attendance. I was the only person to get that. And anytime there was an opportunity to learn, I grabbed it. And I showed up fully. And I think the school saw that I was a dependable person. And so every time they got a call for anything that was in LA, I got referred for it.
Yeah. The right time, you're hitting a peak as cooking's becoming cool, and now everybody who's cool is doing chef work, right?
It's so
So
true.
I think it's great. And I agree. There's something innate to and a certain skill set that people have that are just really good. My sister's an awesome cook, and man, when she comes to the house, we just kind of get out of her way. And you ask her, like, what's the recipe? I don't know what the recipe. Like, she's just throwing stuff together, and somehow it always turns out awesome, which is great. But let's talk about food. Food in America. At one point, we ate nose to tail, right?
Yeah.
And then we went through a change somewhere where we really shifted away from eating organs and eating nose to tail. What happened? Because in other cultures, eating those organs, which are so nutritionally dense, I don't think it's as big of a like a weird thing in other countries, but here it's like nobody eats it. It's not a big thing. So why did we get away from eating organs, especially if they're so healthy and dense with nutrition?
There's a little bit of history to it. So back in the day when they were trying to centralize meat industry, they kind of put it over near Chicago, kind of center of the U.S. kind of thing, and they started doing the railroad system to try to get meat from that Midwest to either coast. Well, when they did that, refrigeration isn't what we know of it now, right? So refrigeration didn't get as cold. And so you could ship muscle in those train cars, but you couldn't ship organs because they need to actually be held at a colder temperature than meat, or they'll go bad. So that was one of the first steps where you started to have more transportation kind of limitations on getting whole animal to people. That was the first stage. But then what you had is during World War II, you had this time when there was actually, so let's back up a little bit. So prior to World War II, there was already a decline in eating organ meats. And during World War II, there was a concern that there was going to be a protein shortage, a meat protein shortage, because they were having to get more meat abroad, right? And so the government actually invested money in campaigns to support people not eating meat or eating different cuts of meat. So that is where Meatless Mondays came around, was World War II. A lot of people don't realize that, but that's when it came out, because it was they were motivated, like, let's figure something out to get people not to eat so much meat. So Meatless Mondays was a thing then. And then that's when they came out with different names for organ meats. Now, organ meat is typically called offal, OFFAL, which is
not a great sales.
Not a great sell. Point. So they were coming up with names that would inspire different associations. So that's when they start calling it like variety meats. There's multiple other names that people may have heard, but we mostly know it as organ meats or offal now. And actually Pluck is an old term for organ meats. A lot of people don't know that. That's why I called my company what I call it.
It was on my list.
Yeah.
Like, where'd the name come from? So I'm glad you put that out there.
Pluck is the name, what they used to say for, they'd say, oh, do you want your pluck with that? If you were getting some meat, or like say the carcass of the chicken or something like that, they say you want your pluck, and they were referring to the organ meats. But so basically we invested in reframing organ meats in people's minds, because the thing is that what happened is that organ meats started to be looked at as poor people's food. So this is very much a economical, socio-economical kind of issue. It's cheaper. So what I'm always telling people, like, if anyone is kind of overwhelmed with the cost of 100% grass-fed meat these days, right? Same 100% grass-fed cow that the ribeye is costing you $24.99. You can get the tongue or the liver or another part of that animal for like $4.99 to $7.99. So, I mean, like, not just half, but a third of the cost, right? So right away, you can get the same quality animal for less. Well, that was a disadvantage back in the day, because people, they came back from World War II. So first of all, it worked. People started eating more organs. So that's why our grandparents or great grandparents, depending on how old someone is listening to this, but that's why they ate liver and onions growing up, is because it worked. The government helped people to start eating more organ meats. They ate them. But then when the people from, fighting came back, well, the women had started working when they left. And then when they came back, women didn't want to stop working. So now you had two people in the household working. You had twice as much money. Well, not twice, because women didn't get equal pay, but you had more money coming into the household, right? Mm-hmm. So what happens then? Well, we can afford the roast beef cut. We don't want the cheap, So it was all this kind of mixed mash of economics and socio-status. And then what happens is when you have people, and this is a really important point that I hope anyone out there that's questioning, well, what power do I have in this kind of like ultra processed world of marketing and where we're getting all this misinformation on health and push these foods that are bad for us? What is our power? What's the same power they had back then? It just went the other way then. So when you stop buying something, they stop carrying it. So as people stopped buying organ meat, you started to not see it at the butcher shop because they're not going to carry something people aren't going to buy. Right. So when it's not carried, then you start to not think about it. If you can't see it, you don't think about it. If you don't think about it, you don't cook it. If you stop cooking it, you lose the culinary background of how to cook it. And then if you're not cooking it, they're not carrying it, then it gets harder to source. Right. So, and then that gets us to where we are now, which is all three of those are major hurdles for people.
Yeah. And I think that one point becomes really good is it's really out of our thought process, out of our vocabulary. Like when you say like I can harvest, like we harvest our own, break down our own animals and you can take the liver and heart and just utilize it real easy when in that mode. But if you're a person who's not doing that, you're buying at the grocery store and your mom didn't cook it, your dad and grandmom didn't cook it, you wouldn't even know how to cook it. You're like, what am I going to do with that? A tongue? What am I going to do with that? And the tongue can be so good, but you got to know how to cook it, right?
It's so overwhelming. It's so overwhelming because have you ever seen a liver start to defrost and just on a countertop? I know you hunt, so have you ever seen? You notice it starts to melt. It literally starts to like disintegrate. It just become this soupy mess on your and like people like what? Like no one understands what to do that. And plus, if you're getting them for particularly a cow liver, I mean they're humongous. So what I always tell people, and we probably are jumping ahead, but what I always tell people, one of the big tricks of how to ease organ meats into your diet is keep it frozen, because it's really when it gets defrosted that you get overwhelmed. And if it's frozen, there's so much you can do with it. It doesn't go bad as fast. It's still frozen. So you just kind of look at it as like a chunk of ice or meat. You don't really think about it as a liver. But what you can do is you can cut it up into really small pieces, the size of a pill, and keep them on a tray in your oven. Just get them frozen. And then once they're frozen in that little small size, you can then put them all in a bag and they'll keep separate. But you got to keep them frozen. And then you can just pop them in your mouth and swallow them like a pill. So they call those liver pills. And we can talk later why I don't necessarily recommend that, but that's one option. No, you can also take that liver and you can grate it. You can literally take it with a box grater and just grate it into your ground meats and just do like a tablespoon at a time. And to 1 pound of meat, do about 1 to 2 tablespoons of grated liver and you're done. Put it right back in the freezer, not overwhelming. And you mix it up and no one will even know it's there. They won't taste it. It won't change the texture. Because those are really what we're talking about. When we talk about people thinking these things are gross, is we're just talking texture, and then we're kind of talking taste, but people don't really understand taste. The taste that they associate with organ meats is actually incorrect. The actual organ meat itself doesn't taste bad. It's because people are overcooking it. It's because of how people are preparing it that's bad.
Yeah, I think the first time I ate liver and heart, I think I was in maybe Southwest Texas, and we took. And the owner of the ranch cooked up hearts and some livers. Very simple cook, big garlic, some butter, fried them up in a pan, very simple cook. And maybe had I not known, if I had known what it was, maybe I would have been like, at that point I was already into hunting and stuff. And we just ate it, and I was like, man, that was really good. What was that? And they're like, oh, that was hearts and livers. So I'm like, holy cow, that's like, because you have a connotation in your mind of what it might taste like, but it is. I think, yeah, it's a lot of it's in our mind that we think it's going to taste a certain way, or it's gross before we eat it. I mean, it's like kids. Like, I don't like chicken. Well, how do you know? I just know. Like, I don't
Yeah.
like broccoli. How do you know? Because I just know. No, you don't. And it does take, for some people, if you're eating big chunks of it, it may take you a couple times to get used to something. But things like Pluck make it really easy to get some of that organ nutrition into you really super easy. But let's talk about why we should be eating more organ blends or organ meat, more offal, right? And
Yeah.
um, why it's better to eat than what we're being sold as the gourmet stuff, which is these expensive cuts of meat. What's the nutritional difference between some of these organs versus the muscle meat?
Yeah. So this is an old number, but in 2015, so you can only imagine it's higher, but in 2015, the percentage of people that were deficient of at least one or more vitamin or mineral in the US was 92%. My guess is that's probably closer to 94, 95 now. And yet we're not calorie deficient. And that's a really important distinction. So it's not an issue of like, we're not eating enough food, that's why we're deficient. It's like, no, we're eating the wrong foods. And we're getting fat from those foods, yet we're still nutrient deficient. And a lot of people don't even realize, and I'm sure this is one of the things you're constantly trying to teach people, is that they don't realize their nagging health issues are usually due to a mineral or vitamin deficiency. Like you got to look at what you're eating. And then of course you got to look at your environment as well and how much sleep you're getting. But a lot of people don't go straight to what they're eating, and they don't realize how much of an effect what we eat has on them. But organ meats are literally Mother Nature's multivitamin. They are the most concentrated source of virtually every important vitamin, mineral, amino acid, and fat you can get. And do they overlap with muscle meat? Yes. But organ meats are more concentrated forms. They have, and depending on what mineral or vitamin we're talking about, sometimes they are higher than muscle meat. So in my judgment, it's not necessarily about like, and I see this a lot, is you see particularly carnivores, all I eat is ribeye, and then I eat only liver. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that's cool. But if we were a tribe back in the day, how it would probably go down is a bunch of us, let's say there's 23 people in the tribe. A handful of us would fast, go hunting after we fasted, because the fasting is going to sharpen our skills. We're going to go hunting. We're going to get that animal. It would be one animal we would probably get because it's big enough and there's only however many of us, 5 to 8 people, we got to take that back, right? So the first thing we do after we kill the animal is we need to then replenish our stores right away from fasting. What do? We probably eat the liver or the heart raw right there, right then and there. We eat it right there because that is the most concentrated. It's like basically what we would try to equate to like a nutrition bar now or something, like, even though that's not accurate, but you know what I mean? Like the way people look at nutrition bars, they're like, oh, I need concentrated amount of nutrition. Let me eat this bar. It's like, that's the original superfood right there. If they would do that, then they would dress the animal and then they would cart it back. Well, once they got it back, let's say they ate the heart already. So now there's no heart for everyone else because they ate it. So because the animal has one heart, the animal has one liver, it has 2 little kidneys. You know what I mean? Like there's not a lot. So when we talk about organ meats, you don't want to get into the weeds with just, well, I'm just going to eat liver. So I really try to promote people, you got to eat the whole animal, because when we think about our needs, the whole animal, there's this concept called like supports like. So what you're eating is going to support that part in your body. So muscle meat is pretty obvious. So if you eat the muscle meat, it's going to support your muscles, right? Well, if we look at heart, for example, so heart has CoQ10. And anyone that takes any heart supplements, CoQ10 is usually a part of it, but heart has that in it. Liver is high in vitamin A, and it's one of the highest, most concentrated forms. And you probably already talked about this, but vitamin A is basically a thyroid supporter. It's the vitamin that helps the thyroid. It contains it's like it directly supports thyroid hormone metabolism, right? I mean, it's really
critical, and well, it is important, and even more important, it for thyroid signaling at the nucleus. All of the a lot of the receptors that thyroid hormone has to interact with are retinoic acid receptors. And so for what retinoic acid is vitamin A. So you need appropriate levels of vitamin A. I think that's one of the big challenges today. I talk about this all the time, is that we are overdosing in vitamin D and taking it in a form that we were never really meant to take a lot of vitamin D orally. That if it was, all the foods would be super rich in vitamin D, and very few foods are super rich in vitamin D. Their foods are rich in vitamin A. We're meant to get most of our vitamin D from the sun. But there is some discussion about how the excessive amounts of vitamin D may reduce the vitamin A, the actual vitamin A that we need from our food, because we're taking so much vitamin D in the absorption process.
I love that you mentioned excess, because that's the other thing I love about organs is that, when you're taking something synthetically, when you're, as you mentioned, taking things orally, you can get too much of something, and you don't always know how these things are going to mix, because the person the bottle that you bought is focused on one specific outcome.
Right.
Where when you get organ meats, that is Mother Nature's multivitamin. It is literally designed. The properties are set up in a way like the minerals that are best absorbable together happen to also, they're all there. The vitamins that are fat soluble, it's part of the food. You know what I mean? So there's an aspect to when you eat it as found in nature, it's kind of perfect. Like you don't have to do too much. Of course, there's delineations of that, like is the animal you're eating from, is it being raised well? Is it sick? There's all that stuff. But if we assume that Mother Nature, or if you believe in religion, God, whatever it is, did it right, then you should be able to get much of what you need from nature. Now, we've mucked that up with our modern living and our modern lifestyle. And that's why we now have to supplement. We do all these things. But if you go back in time, everything you needed was there. Even vitamin D, like vitamin D is found in organ meats. It's also in lard, for example. So one of the things I'm always telling people, when you're cooking like a pate, you're making liver pate or something like that, or even liver and onions, cook it in lard, because it's going to help you. The vitamin D in the lard is going to support the absorption of the vitamin A.
Yeah. And there's huge benefit into eating as close to nature as possible. My motto is eat as close to the way it came from the ground, from the water, off the tree, flew in the air. Like we should be eating as close to that as we can. And it doesn't really have to be that difficult, but unfortunately, we've gotten so far away from really knowing where our foods comes from and what it takes to get the food. And we just think about, just buy the chicken breast, right? It's easy to cook. I know what to do with it. Versus taking a look at that, buying the whole chicken and trying to utilize everything like grandma used to do, which was great. We really do need to get back to that. So I guess that's the next thing we probably should talk about is, and you talked a little bit about liver. People think about organs like these are why would the organs be beneficial if these are the things that are really, they're kind of dirty, right? Like the liver's dirty. Isn't that doing all the detox? Isn't that where all the all chemicals go through? And is that really healthy for us to be eating like something like a liver versus just eating the organ meat because of the cleanliness of the organ and because of what it does?
Yeah, I love this question, because I think we're forgetting when people are asking that question or thinking like that, we're forgetting how just resilient and amazing the human body is. So if you think about it, it's not really a sponge, which I think people are thinking that that's what the organ is when they ask that kind of question, that it's more of a filter, but it's a filter that's designed to work. So it's not like your drain filter or the drain screen, in your drain where it gets clogged and then you have to physically lift it up and knock it out in the garbage and then clean it. If your body was like that, we would all be dead. We would basically be sick because
Yeah.
how is your body going to internally like do that? So it has to be resilient. And so what really the liver or even the kidneys, that what they're doing is they're taking that toxic material that we're acquiring from the foods we eat, from the environment, the air, water, all that. And they're turning these toxic these elements into water soluble forms, because that's how they're going to leave our body. We're going to poop them out. We're going to pee them out. We're going to sweat them out. And if our elimination pathways are not working properly, which, as you probably already know and see in all your clients, a huge percentage of people do not poop daily. A huge percentage of people are not sweating properly. A huge percentage of people are basically not filtering out these toxins properly. So where does it go? Well, it doesn't stay necessarily in the liver or the kidney. It actually goes to your fat. And that's why people that are very obese, when they detoxify and they lose weight too fast, they can actually either kill themselves because of the amount of toxins that go into get absorbed in their body, or they can get very sick. And so that to me is a very important piece, because it kind of goes to another question we get asked a lot is like, well, how much, am I really getting when I do Pluck? And I guess I want to point it out now, because when we talk about the human body, it's a very American concept to go all or nothing. Like that's we pride ourselves in being like, I work hard, I play hard, go big or go home, right? It's right. It's a very false story. It's like we're projecting that. It's a mentality that we've acquired socially that we're projecting onto the human body, but the human body doesn't actually do well with extremities. The human body likes things that are gradual, and it likes to do things slowly, because if it goes too fast, that's when chaos can happen, right? Because if you lose weight too fast, that's when you get the stretch marks. When you lose weight too fast, that's when you get sick from the toxin release. When you gain weight too fast, you get sick, your gallbladder, you get too much fat in your body. Our bodies are resilient, but it doesn't like extremes. And that's why it's always working very hard to get back to middle, back to homeostasis. So for my money, I believe that the best things are the things that we do daily. Those are the things that truly move the health needle, the things that we can make a daily habit. And I like to use this as an example. So let's just say if you're struggling with intimacy, because I could pick anything. We're focusing on food, but let's just pick intimacy because it's totally random, right? Well, if you're working on intimacy, is you getting a hug a month going to move your intimacy needle? Or is you're getting intimate connection daily, even just brief intimate connection daily, whether that's a gentle touch, whether that's connection eye to eye, any kind of intimate connection daily, even if it's just 2 minutes, is going to move your intimacy needle more than one hug a month. And that's literally what people are normally doing, is they're eating liver once a month, or they're working out really intensely for a week and then 3 weeks they're not. We kind of go all in, and then we just fall off because we set ourselves up for failure because we're going too extreme. So right. I am all about those little things. And so Pluck, for example, is yes, you're seasoning, right? So you're getting pinches of organ meat every time you use it. However, you're getting the microdosing frequently because you're using it with every meal, which is ideally what it's set up for you to do. And when you get a little bit of something all the time, that's cumulative effect. And we can see that in a positive way, or we can see it in a negative way. Like, for example, glyphosate. Well, glyphosate, when it was sold to America in the late 50s, we were told it's micro amounts. It's not going to hurt human health. FDA, approved it. Well, look at us now. It's in breast milk. It's in our water. It's in our soil. It's in our air. We can't get rid of it. This micro amounts of glyphosate is now equated to it being in every aspect of our life. And we have no idea the kind of havoc it's wreaking on our bodies.
Yeah. And for the listener, glyphosate, what they're talking about is what he's talking about is essentially Roundup was this chemical that almost everybody's heard of, that it was used as an essentially as an
A week?
antibiotic, right?
Yeah.
To help kill organisms and make it so we could, we could grow plants without all the disease and everything on it. It would kill the organisms. Um, and then we were told, hey, it doesn't hurt us because we don't have this thing called a Shikimate pathway, so therefore it can't hurt us. But what we didn't learn until later was that our gut flora has a Shikimate pathway. And so, yeah, it didn't hurt us directly because we don't have that pathway, but it hurt us indirectly because of the impact it had on our gut biome. And our gut biome, the way our gut biome goes, so goes our health and well-being, because we got more organisms in our gut than we have our own genes. And if there's dysbiosis there, and that's a rampant thing in today's world with the amount of processed foods and chemicals and everything else we consume, that stuff can lead to something like a glyphosate just from a microdose perspective, and it's probably more than a microdose at this point.
Oh, at this point, yeah, it's huge.
The impact it has. So, yeah, I think that's a good topic to talk about. We kind of should slide right in there. Like when we think about getting it, maybe small, consistent doses, and I like the idea that it's more of a seasoning. You could season things with it. You can put it in a shaker and just use it as your seasoning, and over just putting table salt right on it, or just a regular seasoning salt. You could use this in place of that and get continual micro doses. And I agree with what you said. Like even when somebody's taking a B complex, right? They're taking a B complex that is somehow we had to derive those vitamins somewhere, sometimes chemically derived, some artificially derive them. And we're giving somebody like 1000% of what maybe the daily requirements. Right. And you could say, well, the RDA is too low. It needs to be higher. But if you're at 1333% of the daily intake, maybe we don't need that mega dose all at one time as a supplement or as a capsule. I think the other thing,
unless you've been tested, like if you've gotten tested and you have someone overseeing the testing, let them designate what you need, right? But most people are not tested.
But I would still, I still use supplementation to help people get better, but the blends we put together are often
too much.
They're too much. And I think one of the things that's missing, and I've formulated, so I get this, we're trying to put things together that we think are good blends, but when we eat plants in their natural state, when we eat organs in their and eat close to nature, we're eating things in their natural forms. And not only are we getting some of these individual micronutrients that we want out of our foods, we're also getting the cofactors that help them work often in the body appropriately. And what we're also getting is the things that we don't know are necessarily in those foods that have a synergistic effect. And this isn't a great example, but it's the chicken noodle soup analogy. And you probably know the story where, hey, chicken noodle soup was thought to help people get over being sick faster. And the food industry realized that, okay, well, let's figure out what ingredient this is. It was the pharmaceutical company, or one of the, somebody smart was like, let's just break it down and we'll figure out what ingredient it was. And then we'll just sell that, right? So they broke the chicken noodle soup down to everything they could measure, tried each one. Not one individual ingredient by itself seemed to be beneficial. But then when they gave them chicken noodle soup, people got better. So what was it? What was it about it? It was probably the synergistic effect. And there was probably ingredients in there that we don't even know what they are at this point.
And I love that you're saying this, right? I think it's so important when people with your educational background admit, like, there's so much we don't know. And let alone there's so much that there's nobody that knows how it all mixes together. So anytime we're studying something, we're isolating things. No one knows how, like, when you have this one thing going on in this specific environment, also coupled with this other thing, and then coupled with that, and then ingesting or inhaling this air and this kind of water. Like, no one knows this everything mixed together. No one knows the toxic soup.
we have a reductionist view of almost everything. Why? Because it's easier to learn that way. And I have that discussion with clients all the time. Why are you taking that? Well, because that's going to help my thyroid convert. So your body is going to take in, let's say it's selenium, and it's going to use that selenium for what's important. You don't get to determine that you want that selenium to support T4 to T3 conversion. Maybe if you're in a homeostatic low stress state and you're low on selenium, maybe it helps convert T4 to T3. But you're chronically inflamed. You have chronic health issues. You're in an allostatic state, and which is an excessive stress state. So what does the body do? It slows down normal metabolism, ramps up cell defense. You're not going to convert more T4 to T3 when you're in that model. You don't get to dictate what happens with that selenium. Your body deals with these micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, and use them for what's best for what that cell, that tissue state is in. So I take B6. I think I'm allergic to B6 because when I take it, it creates these symptoms. You're not allergic to it. That B6 is getting used probably for an inflammatory cell defense process because that's the more important thing at the moment. But we have this silly concept that we get to determine like what happens to the stuff when we put it in. And really this cellular innate intelligence of the body doesn't really make that many mistakes. We came from two cells, right? And to what we are today. And we think that, hey, the body just forgets how to work. No, most of what we think as sickness or illness is really a defensive positioning, what we call allostatic regulation. And yes, long-term allostatic regulation creates dysfunction and disease, but that's really at the early part, especially, that's not the thing. Like the fever is not your problem. The fever is the body's solution to a threat, a toxin, an organism. That's what your body's trying to do, is increase the fever to kill something off. We always kind of think about it today, like my grandma wouldn't have thought that way. But today we think, oh, I got a fever, I'm sick, I got to get rid of the fever, as if that fixes it. And it's just silliness.
Yeah, we're seeing it with Ozempic, right? Everyone thinks like, oh, it's going to remove the fat exactly where I want it to be removed. And it's like, nope, you don't get to control where the fat goes. It could come from your brain. You don't know.
What's not funny, but is that almost everybody, that's a GLP-1 agonist drug. So what it's doing, right, is it's providing, it's a drug that binds to GLP-1 receptors. And so when you think about where does GLP-1 comes, it comes from a healthy gut, healthy GI tract. So anybody who's got decreased GLP-1 signaling probably has a gut issue, a dysbiotic gut, inflammatory gut. So yes, we can sell them the GLP-1 agonist, which they can take. It'll reduce glucose absorption. It'll stimulate more insulin production. They'll lose some body fat. They're also going to lose a lot of muscle mass. But at the end of the day, what haven't we fixed? We haven't fixed the dysbiosis and the gut inflammation that was there to begin with. And so what happens when they're done? They've got less muscle mass. They may have some less body fat, but they've lost a lot of muscle mass. They still have the same inflammatory issue. And now they put the Frankenfood right back in again and they go, I'm gaining weight. And that's why people are like, yeah, once you're on it, it's hard to come off of it. And I've got patients now that have like paralyzed ileae because they
heard that, yeah.
And they can't eat anything at this point because their GI tract is so damaged from these meds. It's sad, it's scary, but let's get back on your topic, because I could spend all day talking about that.
I was going to say, I mean, this is a similar concept, which is, so we slaughter let's say the cow. We slaughter our cow. And when we're focusing just on muscle meat, it's about 50% of the cow. It's a little off, a little degree here, a little degree there, but it's basically about 50%. So that means 50% is the offal or the organ meat. And now organ meat is classified as anything that's not muscle or bone, right? So that's every other part of the animal. So we're designating the muscle as for human consumption, but then we're designating most of the organ or offal as not for human consumption. And then we're turning around, we're giving it to other industry. It still gets used. I mean, some cases it gets tossed, but in most cases it gets used, but it goes to pet food. It goes to to bone meal for agriculture. It goes to feeding animals and zoos and in our agricultural system. So it goes to other industry. But then what happens to us? Well, we're nutrient deficient because of how we're eating. And so what do? We turn around and we look to replace the nutrients we could have gotten from that other 50% of the animal. And we're turning towards supplement industry and $1 billion industry and just putting money towards there, and then achieve, potentially hitting the barriers that you've already talked about, which maybe too much of this, too little of that, you're not knowing how it's going to work with the body. So when I think about that, I'm like, we can greenwash all we want, but one of the most green things you can do for the planet and for our own health, and to kind of close loop the system, which is really how our ancestors did it, is to use every part of that animal for human consumption, or as much of it as you can.
Yeah. So not everybody's going to go out and harvest their own animals and be able to get that stuff. So let's talk about where does somebody start to incorporate, or how do you recommend somebody start to incorporate some of the offal into their regular diet?
Yeah. So if organ meats are the gateway to nutritional abundance, I would say Pluck is the gateway to organs. And it's mostly because it's so easy and delicious. It's just an easy entry point. You can give it to kids. There's no real hurdles. But I don't want you to stop there, because I'm not just selling product. I'm trying to support people in eating that whole animal. So then I would say stage 2 might be what we've already discussed, is getting a frozen liver, and you can get that from your local store. You can go to a farmer's market. It's not too hard to find it. You can find them online. There's some great resources like US Wellness Meats. There's White Oak Pastures on the East Coast. Great sources of organ meats. Once you get it, it's frozen. You always get, most of the time when you get organs from a farmer's market or from online, it always comes frozen. So you then can keep it in your freezer. You can grate it, like I told you. For 1 pound of meat, you do about one tablespoon. Only go up to about 2 tablespoons, because you don't want to do too much where it starts to change the texture or the taste, because now we're talking about easing into organ meats, right? So we're not trying to do that just yet. That's going to come in time. Because really what we're doing as we ease into organ meats is we're also shifting the palate. So our palate, the 4 that we mostly talk about are salty, sweet, bitter, and sour. But we have a 5th one. It was discovered in Japan in the 90s. It's called umami. And umami is found in lots of different foods. It's in meat, it's in tomatoes, it's in mushrooms. Like, you can find umami in a lot of different sources, but it's particularly present in concentrated organ meats, like what we use in Pluck. So concentrated freeze-dried powdered organ meats. So what happens when people start using something like Pluck or an umami source, even just eating the organs, is we start to shift that palate. And if anyone has thought about if anyone's ever heard or met someone who's been incarcerated, they'll tell you about the first time they went in, the food was horrible, sucked. But then by the time they got out, they actually missed the food. They actually craved it. And that's basically proof of that. We can basically get ourselves to like anything. We just have to do it all the time. It has to be a daily thing. And so by incorporating that umami flavor into your diet, whether, like I said, through the seasoning or through just little bits of it in your food, not enough to change the taste, just enough to get a little bit of that umami in your food, your palate will start to change, and you will start to actually crave it. You'll actually start to welcome these new flavors into your diet. So as we start to do that, you have the grating option. You can also buy ground meat that already has the organ meats in it. Companies like Force of Nature, they use about 10%, and they usually, you can find it in the freezer aisle at your grocery store. And it's basically heart and liver, I think is what they're using. They usually call them ancestral blends. Mm-hmm. Then what you can do is you can start to actually, basically, as you get the flavor for it, is you can start to incorporate organs that are closest to muscle meat. And you actually already identified one of them. You said tongue. So tongue and heart are the 2 that are closest to organ meats. But we don't have to jump to beef, heart, or tongue. I actually recommend the first organ you kind of start to buy and incorporate is poultry heart. So chicken heart. Chicken hearts are tiny. They're kind of the size of a mushroom, and they're extremely mild. So you can literally, when you get them, you'll probably end up getting about 10 to 12 or even 15 in a container, right? And what you can do is just treat them. Let's say you're making a spaghetti sauce. Treat it just like you would a mushroom. Like, I'm not going to put 10 mushrooms in that spaghetti sauce. I might do 2 to 3, and I might chop them up, right? So just do the same thing with that chicken heart. Grab 2 or 3, chop them up just like you would a mushroom, really dice them, into bite size, and then throw them into that spaghetti sauce. No one will know they're there. They will all think it's a mushroom because it's got a texture of a mushroom. Then once you're ready to start graduating even further, now let's get like a beef tongue. Beef tongues are amazing because, as you already mentioned, they're actually really tasty. They actually taste really good. They're just overwhelming because they've got this thick skin on the outside, and the shape of them reminds you of your own tongue. That's the only reason, they're a little overwhelming. But I always say, have fun. Bust up the mindset on it. So, like, if you're someone who shares things on social media, when you get a tongue, first thing you should do is hold it up to your mouth and, pretend you're Gene Simmons or something like that from Kiss, right? It's like, just have fun with it. Pretend it's not this heavy thing. And then what you do is you just braise it. You can slow cook it. You can put it in a pressure cooker, but you basically just got to cook it for about an hour and a half with some liquid. And what happens is that sheath will just kind of peel right off. You just slice it a little bit and it peels right off. And underneath that is this delicate, tasty muscle. Yeah. And you can take that muscle and you can season it. You can saute it in some butter. You can stick it under your broiler and kind of crisp it up. And then just use a fork. And if you've cooked it long enough, it will shred just like carnitas or something like that. Mm-hmm. And what I usually recommend is, if people, because one of the ways you see tongue show up in cuisines is you see it in tacos. It shows up in Mexican restaurants as lengua. So basically treat it the same way. Let's say if you're someone who does Taco Tuesdays at home, right? Well, you're usually braising your meat. So just add the tongue when you're braising the pork shoulder or your barbacoa or your beef, right? And then the tongue is going to be smaller than that other cut. Shred it, cook it the way I just described, and then combine it with the pork or the beef. And once again, no one will know it's there.
Right. Yeah. I think that's the best thing. Incorporating it with other things, I think makes it so much easier. Burger meat, nobody knows the difference when it's blended in there. And you're getting the benefits of it. Yeah, and I think it's a process. I think it's not something that most people are going to do, but I think this is probably a really good. I love the flavor of this. I think it's a great strategy to get people started thinking about it, because if you can do the seasoning and you're like, oh, that's a bunch. I think it's an easier jump to get to the next part.
Absolutely.
Can you explain how this is processed? Because I think one of the things that people might think is like, when you process it, how do you protect the nutritional value of the organs as it's processed?
Yeah. So basically, anytime we do any heat with anything, it's going to denature it slightly. The longer, it increases histamines and it denatures it. So raw is always going to be the most nutritious. Now, modern technology has allowed us to also freeze dry, and freeze drying actually maintains more of the nutrition than even dehydrating, just to give people something to compare to. So I would say it goes raw, then freeze drying, or some kind of drum drying, something very low heat that allows it to dry and lose the water moisture, because that's the key. Is we're preserving it, because when you have a raw organ and you freeze dry it, you're left with about 20%. So that kind of also answers the question of like, well, how concentrated is the organ meats in Pluck? 100% organ down to 20% when it's freeze dried. That's incredibly concentrated once you remove the water weight. Incredibly concentrated. And we're doing 5 organs. Pluck has liver, heart, kidney, spleen, and pancreas. And it's those concentrated organs powdered. So that right there, to me, kind of tells you how powerful it can, even a little bit, is. Like, so with Pluck, we have 4 varieties. So we have 3 that have Redmond real salt and spices and herbs, organic spices and herbs, and then 1 that's just the organ meat. And the one that's just the organ meat is our black bag. It's called Pure. And I'm always telling people, if you just do a teaspoon of that, that is equivalent to 2 ounces of organs. Just,
Wow.
raw
Yeah.
organs. And what's powerful about it is that you can add it to a smoothie. You can add it to that spaghetti sauce I was talking about. And now you just got 2 ounces of organ meats effortlessly in your sauce or in your dressing. But how we actually source the organ meats is, so we get it from New Zealand. And honestly, that's where most of the companies that sell organ meats in capsules, that's what they do as well. We source from New Zealand because New Zealand is an island. So they're able to very much control the what comes in and out of that island. And they do. They're very, very intense about it. It's one of their major exports. So they've also created a supply chain where you can get access to pretty much the whole animal. That's where most of the protein powders come from, the bone broth protein powders and the beef isolate protein powders. Most of them are coming from either Argentina or New Zealand. New Zealand is kind of, within the industry, is known to be a slightly higher quality. They're also the cows are able to eat green grass year round there because of the weather. Now, whenever we read that a cow is 100% grass fed, it's the question is, well, what grass? Because it's only green grass part of the year in the US and in most of the world, but in New Zealand,
Right.
you can get green grass year round. So no cow is getting green grass year round except for New Zealand. So even when you buy in green, grass fed in the US, it's not green grass. It's sometimes it's hay or it's dried grass. And then what they do is they sometimes ferment it to increase the digestibility of it and to increase the nutrition. So they are trying to make it as nutrient viable as they can, but the 100% green grass is really the way to go. And then they're freeze drying it, as I said, which is preserving as much of the nutrients. And how we recommend people use Pluck is, well, you can add it to your ground meats and mix it in. It's going to preserve it. But I actually don't recommend putting it on the outside of like a steak, or we talked earlier about, like a ribs, smoked ribs or something like that. I think a lot of times people do that, but as you can attest, when you smoke a rib or grill a rib, what happens to all the spices that you rubbed on the outside? They turn black. They get burnt. Right. And that's the reality. Yes, we've grown an affinity for that, but it's actually not very healthy for you. Really, it's carcinogenic, when it turns black like that. So ultimately, a lot of those spices burn, like paprika burns really quickly. Any kind of pepper is going to burn very fast. But what I recommend is people just use it as a finishing salt, because you're going to maximize the nutrition and you're going to maximize the flavor, because you want the flavor to pop. And when it gets burnt, it gets bitter. So just sprinkling that flavor on top after, like one of the best things, I love this actually. If you're a steak eater, one of the best ways to eat a steak is you cook the steak however you want to cook it, on a grill or on a stovetop. But then what you do beforehand is you make some compounded butter. So you take butter and you mix it, let it get room temperature. You mix it with the Pluck until it's nice and concentrated in the butter. And then you put it in the refrigerator, kind of mold it to the shape you want it in the refrigerator. And then when that steak is ready to be served, you slice it, ready to serve. Just cut a piece of that butter on and let the butter and the Pluck just melt over it. It is phenomenal. I mean, like, it's one of the best steaks you'll ever have. Yeah. You can put Pluck on popcorn. You can put it on salads. You can put it in dressings. I mean, it's so versatile. Anything you can salt, you can Pluck. So that's why it's the gateway.
And so there's, organ supplements they've hit a high. They did hit a little when the one of the owners of one of the big organ supplement companies,
Liver King
got himself a little bit of trouble there publicly. There was maybe a little dip, but I think a lot of people are buying organ blends, and I think it's a good strategy. Again, another potential bridge. But how would you compare the Pluck to the capsules? You think it's just another strategy to get more organ into somebody, or do you see this as a better option potentially?
Well, I definitely am. I'm never going to poo-poo on anyone else's company, first of all, because it's like, running a company is incredibly hard. And so I would never disparage them. I think that any way you're going to get these nutrients in your diet is the right way. If it's the one you're going to do, Whatever
Got it.
you can do is the right way.
Mhm.
However, that said, there is something called the lingual neural response. And that's basically where taste communicates to our brain through neural signaling
Mhm.
what it is that our body wants and needs. And the only way to trigger this biological communication that's basically been formed since, since the body was formed, because keep in mind, our taste is what kept us alive. If you ate something and it was bitter, that was probably poisonous. If you ate something and it was sweet, it was probably nutritious. Like our bodies, our biological communication developed over 100,000 plus years, right? So this is not something that we just it's the last 50 years. It's like, no, this is established to help us survive. And what's happening when we swallow a capsule is we're bypassing that. And so that's what happens. I get told this all the time. People that are taking those capsules is they'll say, hey, I'm following the back of the bottle. It says take 6 to 8 of these capsules. And I do, and I feel nauseous. And I'm like, yeah, that's probably because you don't need 6 to 8. I don't know what's going on in your body, but there's no way a bottle can tell you what you need. So the only way to really know is for you to eat it. And what's beautiful about our body, and I'll even share, it shows up in a few ways, but what's so beautiful about our human body is that it will tell you whether it needs it or not. You just got to be listening. So first of all, think about when a woman gets pregnant. The first month, they can still drink alcohol. It's fine. But by the second month, if they tried the second or third month, when they start to try to drink that wine, it literally tastes different. What changed? The wine didn't change. It's their body that changed. It's the body now is doing something totally different. It's growing something different than it was before. And so thus the body, that lingual response is communicating, hey, you shouldn't be drinking this because this will hurt what you're now growing, right? Well, the body does the same thing with organ meats or any food. That if you go to eat it, like let's say salt, for example, if I put salt on your tongue, your body will tell you when to stop. If I do the first dip, it will taste pretty good. By the second dip, maybe, but definitely not the third. The third dip, your body's probably going like, you better stop. I'm overstimulated. This is not, I don't want anymore. And the salt will literally taste gross. It will go from tasting really good to gross. Well, if I gave you a salt tablet, you swallow that salt tablet 15, 20, 30 minutes later, you're like, wait, why am I so bloated? Oh, I got too much of something because we completely bypassed it.
Yeah.
So I am a big, big believer in the only way to truly get back to that kind of ancestral knowledge of what your body wants and needs is to eat the food and to eat it mindfully, to not just, gulp it down or to go crazy and not chew and just swallow, but to really like mindfully choose your food, mindfully eat, do it in an environment that's conducive towards, joy and like positivity, be around people when you're eating that also are positive, that, don't talk business at the table kind of concept, like, because you don't want to be in a stressed out state. You want to be in a calm, like absorption conducive state. And you also want to be of the right mindset where you're not thinking that the food you're eating is going to harm you. You want to be thinking that it's going to help you. These things are very, very powerful, and we don't give them enough credit.
Yeah. And I think to some degree, we can actually train our brain the other ways too. And I think that's part of the problem with some of
That
these
is the
artificial
problem.
sweeteners and everything else is we start to give we get more of this more processed kind of Franken-based foods, and we start to change that neural programming and alter it a little bit, and then real food doesn't taste like it should. And the other thing, and we didn't get into it, but you grow some broccoli in your backyard, it's going to have a taste. You buy it at the regular grocery store,
Oh
it may
yeah.
not have any taste, right? And
Not
so
no taste. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so
And that's
you
mindful growing. I think of that as like you're mindfully thinking about the sourcing of your food and how it was grown, how long it was on the vine or in the ground, or on the tree. It's like these things matter, and it affects the flavor and it affects the nutrition of it. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think to some degree it affects the toxicity. And I think this is where people are, especially the carnivore world, and people are talking about plants are toxic and they're going to kill you and they have toxins in them. I think a lot of those plants are meant to be eaten. The problem is that we we mass produce, pull them before they're ripe, force ripen them, which means that they haven't lost a lot of maybe the toxicity that protected them from being eaten by nature's animals until they were ripe and ready to eat, and so they potentially have a higher level of toxicity. But I think to a large degree we've lost the innate understanding of what good quality food tastes like, because we've eaten bland, kind of heavy, heavily manufactured, heavily farmed processed foods. And we're like, I don't know. I thought broccoli was just, it tastes bland. And versus when you get the broccoli from your garden, you're like, wow, that's got a really pungent kind of mustardy taste to it. Right. No,
Totally.
that's what broccoli tastes like. That's what a tomato actually tastes like. And I think we've lost that. And that's probably, the same thing we have to do is especially from an organ perspective, is kind of rebuild that and reconnect that neural pathway, bring it back, because it's innate inside of us. But if you don't ever use it, that pathway kind of gets tamped down. So I think,
I was going to share that there's a professor of archaeology. His name's Bill Schindler. He wrote a book called Eat Like a Human. He's got a fantastic quote. It's we are the only species in the world that looks to someone else to tell us what to eat. It always just kind of like floors me when I hear that quote, because here's the thing. There's nearly 9 million species in the world. So for us to be the only one that doesn't know what to eat, it tells you how far we've really come, and how messed up we've made it for ourselves by putting profit over health.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I tell people all the time when I'm trying to get them, like when they're like, what do I need a multivitamin? I'm like, I would suggest a digestive enzyme to help you break down the food you're already eating to get the most nutritional value, some type of organ or organ supplement. And those things would be before you even consider or think about a multivitamin, because if you eat an organ blend, you're getting so much nutritional value. If you have a habit of eating 80% of the time whole food based diet, the nutrition is going to be in there, and you just have to be able to break it down and digest it better. So,
and ultimately the question that becomes is like, well, easier said than done, right? Because we're dealing with, addictions, we're dealing with mass marketing of these ultra processed foods. We only know what we know, right? So if you're eating these foods, like this is kind of the argument around young people, right? Young people will eat these foods, don't feel any effects, so they don't see the problem, right? But we only know what we know. And so I'm always trying to just tell people, look, just choose one thing you can do this week. And the best thing that you can do when you're buying food is just buy things that are an ingredient versus that have ingredients.
Yeah.
That just start there. It doesn't have to get much more complicated than that. And then start to lower these ultra processed foods that we are getting into our diet randomly or consciously, whatever it is. But the only way we're going to get change is kind of what I said earlier, which is we got to stop buying the foods that we don't want to see on the shelves.
Yeah.
And we're all guilty of this. We're all going to the grocery stores or the fast food places or the restaurants, and we're like, oh, well, I just do it in moderation. It's okay. It's like, no. It will never change if you keep going to it. Never.
Yeah, I totally agree there. So let's do this. Let's talk about where people can learn more about Pluck, that if they're interested in checking this out, where do they go? And what would where do they start? Because you have a number of different things there. Obviously, you might be like, try them all, right? But like, where would you say? I would say this. If I would say that the original is a great place to start. But
absolutely, yeah. It's so find us at eatpluck.com. You can also find it on Amazon if you're an Amazon shopper. It's just easy. Just add it to your order there. But yeah, the original, the yellow bag that you showed everyone at the beginning, that is the original Pluck. Like that is the first product we came out with. So I definitely think if you're interested in the seasonings, that's a good place to start. It kind of has a flavor like, I don't know if you'd agree, but it's kind of like Old Bay or Lowry's. It's got that kind of
Yeah.
all-purpose seasoning
Yeah.
kind of flavor to it. Well,
Absolutely.
yeah. So then we have this spicy, which is you take the original and just add a little cayenne to it. It's very mild because the whole goal of Pluck is to truly be a gateway for not just the adults, but for the kids too. So I didn't want to make anything too extreme, but it's got a little bit of heat at the end. You got flavor first, then heat. And the proportions are slightly different of the other ingredients. And so that one has a little bit more of like a barbecue-y taste to it, even though there's no sweetener in it. And then the zesty garlic is really cool. That I would say probably that would be your second best bet, is start with the original and then maybe go to zesty garlic. But the zesty garlic is what we call AIP, and it's got no nightshades and no seeds for anyone that has issues with those. And what I love about that one is, if anyone out there that's listening is AIP, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. Is like every seasoning for AIP is turmeric based. Like it's just like, you cannot escape the flavor profile that most of the industry is focused on for AIP. And I'm just really happy that anyone will like zesty garlic. But if you're AIP, you're going to really like it because it's completely different from what is out there on the market. And all three of those are really great gateways. They're ones that are more savory than other. Like they're really things that are going to add flavor to the foods, flavor and nutrition to the food you're adding it to. The black bag is more specific. It's just the organ meats, no salt, no spices, no herbs. That one's called pure. Now that one, what's cool about that one is it can go sweet or savory. So you could add that to a smoothie. Like I think I said that earlier. You could add that to even brownies. If you're making brownies, you could add it to that. Like no one will know as long as you keep the amount you're adding smaller than the rest of the recipe. Also the really cool thing about pure is you can give it to pets like cats and dogs. Most pet food does not have organ meat in it. Particularly the dry food, it doesn't. It should, but it doesn't. And so you just add a sprinkle of that onto their food and they will go crazy, particularly if they're a picky eater. It's truly amazing for that. But what ultimately the pure is as well is it's your gateway to control what you're doing. Like if you're like, hey man, I have seasonings, I love my seasonings, I don't want to mess with those, then great. Keep your seasonings and then buy pure and then add pure to your seasoning. Just, add the proportion of organ meats to your seasoning that fit your taste, your flavor profile. Like the pure is there for you to be in control of it. I just want you to get the organ meats. And pure is no different than what you're getting from capsules. It's just not in capsules and it's a little cheaper. That's really it. But it's the same quality sourcing from 100% grass-fed cows from New Zealand. So you I tried to really make it very easy to get. You have lots of different choices. We use about 17, I'm trying to get it to 20%, but about 17% organ meats to our flavored bags. I have found that that's I can go to about that and it won't affect the flavor. You won't taste organ meats.
Right.
So to me, the flavors are more like maintenance. You're just doing that every day, every meal. Like I said, it's very versatile. You can put on anything, but you can just kind of go on autopilot with it. And if you get organ meats on the side, great. If you get more, you're still golden. It's not going to push you into a danger zone because it's very kind of well balanced. But if you're someone who's like, look, I've been tested, Dr. Eric, he told me that I was anemic. I need to get organ meats. I need a certain amount. Then I would get the black bag and I would just either add more of the black bag to the other bags, or I would just do a teaspoon of that a day because that's 2 ounces of organ meats right there.
Awesome. Well, and I know we'll finish with this. I know you've authored or co-authored a few cookbooks. Is there any of your cookbooks that you kind of have recipes for organ meats, or is it you have that on your Pluck website of how to get more organ meats into your regular diet?
Yeah, so I would definitely go to our website. It's all free. Go to recipes. It's at the top of the site. There's tons of recipes, and they don't just have Pluck. Like there's organ meat recipes. It's kind of a little bit of everything to show you, and they're very good recipes. Some of them are for me, but I've curated a lot of recipes from really talented chefs and just passionate cooks. So Really, really great recipes. The cookbooks that I did not actually incorporate organ meats back in the day. So those ones don't have them. However, I'm in the process of working on one now, and that one is going to basically, I'm going through, I'm grabbing all my historic recipes that I made, because I've made some really, really solid recipes over the years that are really easy and flavorful. So I don't want to necessarily reinvent the wheel. I'm going to take those, but I'm going to really help to make kind of this ancestral eating very everyday. And that's actually the name of the cookbook, is Everyday Ancestral. So it's going to show people how to incorporate these foods into your diet so easily, effortlessly, and in a daily manner.
Awesome. Well, James, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. We'll be sure to make sure we put the information out there, a link to the website. I'm a fan, and I'd recommend everybody at least give it a shot. It is, I thought it was really, really good. So kudos to you and coming up with the product. And yeah, we'll hopefully get more people involved and get them on the gateway to get more organ meats. I think this will be really helpful. All right.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I appreciate the talk.